everybody, this is Out of Initiative, and today we're going to be talking about villains. What do villains need? Villains need henchmen that actually do their jobs. They need good presentation. They need a fantastic outfit. And the last thing they need is they have to have...
very good masks!
Yeah, pretty much.
You have to look cool!
You look like Caesar from Planet of the Apes.
But Caesar's not a villain.
Well, it depends on what perspective you're looking at.
I guess so.
I think he's the one that kicks off the whole monkey apocalypse thing.
I'm pretty sure he does.
I'm pretty sure Caesar actually is one of the... Like, to the humans, he's a villain.
Yeah, he's the first talking ape, right?
I think so. I think he is. Anyway, beside the point. Roll clip.
Woo! Welcome back. Today we are talking about villains.
We are wanting to talk about villains today, particularly how you can make a good villain for your campaign. There's a couple ways you can do this. And one of the ways you can do is to make just a villain that's just terrifying.
I feel like terrifying villains really evoke that feeling of fear. One of the strongest emotions and the best emotion to put into your players to make them have a very memorable game.
Right, and one of the scariest villains I can think of from my own childhood was that of Firelord Ozai. Ozai was just a really imposing figure. They did a really good job introducing his character.
When they first introduce him, they do something that writers call the kill the puppy technique, where he is facing off against his own son and burns him and then banishes him. This is forming the kill the puppy technique, where when you first introduce your villain, you have them kill something or hurt somebody that is super pure, super innocent, not deserving of any of it, and just does it just to make you feel like he is a bad, bad dude.
No, another thing they do is they don't make it so that he's very, very mysterious. They jack up his power, like, oh, he's a really scary guy, he's really powerful powerful firebender, and then they don't show his face at all until the final season. When they do finally show his face, it's behind big triumphant music, dun 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 dun. It's like, oh, that's what it looks like. Oh, and he really lives up to that power in the finale when he's fighting Aang. You see his actual power come through, and he just blows Aang away for that first half of that fight.
I feel like Ozai really comes in and he brings out these very indicative feelings of just like cruelty, lack of like compassion for others, and has his whole heart set for one goal, and that is to conquer the world.
One thing you can do it with your villains is make them seem like they're an unknown.
But not too much like an unknown, so that way your players don't know who the villain is.
Right. So you can make, like, I think you were telling me about Strahd, how he's a great example of that.
Exactly. Strahd is a villain that everybody knows before they even start the campaign, because the campaign's called Curse of Strahd. You know that's the guy you're going to have to kill at the end.
Right. And Strahd is really, really good because you know he's powerful. You know he's a big deal. But then he'll come out into like some random market. He's on a date, and he's like, "Oh, hey guys, how you doing? I'm gonna kill you eventually, but whatever."
Or you'll invite the players to dinner, and then let them try to explore his castle, which is full of traps and horrible things that can happen to you.
No, he's scary, just because you don't know what he's going to do next.
Ozai is in a very similar example because he is scary because you just don't know how cruel he's going to be or how far his cruelty extends.
Yeah. For example, you really see that when he decides to burn down the entire Earth Kingdom. With Strahd, you see that with his just like, oh yeah, come over to my house, we're going to eat dinner, I'm going to leave you guys alone, do what you want, see what happens to you.
And then he comes back with like some sort of virgin lady from a village and has like, yep, I just drank some blood.
Yep, I just drained this girl, look at this, it's great. So the way you can do this with your own villains is you could really make them so you're not really sure what's going to happen with them. Your players don't really know what's going to happen next. Maybe they come in and take something important to the party. Maybe they come in and kill the mayor of the town that they're helping. Or maybe they don't do anything. Maybe you just see their cruelty and their villainy through their henchmen that they hire. That's one way you can make your villain scary, is by having their henchmen do weird things or be cruel, or to actually have them show up and do something cruel, or maybe they do kill the puppy. That's a way to get your characters motivated to want to do something about this villain rather than just having it be some bad guy.
Another way you can make your villain scary is, and this is a very fun way, is by kind of demonstrating that power. One of my favorite villains is Omniman from the show called Invincible. He is...
Oh, yeah, I know this guy. Sorry.
Yeah, he's absolutely scary, because at the very beginning you see that he kills the Guardians of the Globe, the Justice League of their world. And the rest of the show, you're on edge trying to figure out when are people going to find out that he killed them, and when is he going to find out that they know that he killed them, and what is he going to do about it? Because this guy's just a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. I haven't actually seen Invincible, but I've seen clips from it.
Right.
And he's just overwhelmingly powerful. Like, there's that meme where it shows, like, the jets flying by. And he says, look at what they have to do to copy even a fraction of our power.
Right.
Like, he's just an incredibly vain and powerful dude. That's one thing you can do with your villain. Make him super powerful and show it.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
But at the same time, the thing that made him scary wasn't necessarily the power. It's just how close the main characters are to that danger constantly.
The on edge.
Yes.
I see. Okay. Just what's going to happen. Is he going to kill us? Is he going to...
Because, like, if he was off, like, on a different planet, we wouldn't be scared. But he's in the family room with our main characters.
Right. So how would you do that in a D&D session with a villain? How do you portray that? You have the risk of telling the players too much.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that you have to be really careful about. Is you don't want them to know too much. Otherwise it ruins the surprise.
Right.
So how would you run a game with a villain that's that close to you guys? Would you, like, show, like, backstories, like, your characters know this, but you guys as players do?
That is one option. Then it's like a meta-knowledge, and you're playing to your players as their audience. Or you can do a whole Curse of Strahd scenario where, like, Strahd is having dinner with them, and they know how bad he is, because in the previous fight, they fought Strahd, and they were barely able to defeat his henchmen, and Strahd was just going along killing people left and right, and anybody who got within 5 feet of Strahd was thrown through the wind. And then now they're in the same room as this guy trying to have a conversation.
Just a civil conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that is an example of, like, Strahd. With your own home games, I recommended doing something where just, like, be creative and try to, maybe one of the players knows the villain personally, and they're aware of how bad the villain is, but the rest of the party doesn't.
Right. So you trust this character, this player, to really hype up the villainy. So that's something you have to talk to the player about outside of stuff. You have to be like, hey, you know this guy. I'm gonna tell you a bit about them, so you know about them.
Mm-hmm.
They're a big deal. Make it seem like they're a big deal. And I'm gonna tell you all their backstory, and I'm working out with your backstory, so it's
Right.
really personal to you.
And maybe just, like, let players in on the knowledge one after another as they interact with the villain.
That's actually really clever. That's really clever. And while we're on the subject of villains, there's other ways to make them intriguing as characters, other than just making them scary or powerful. Another type of villain that I really like personally is the sympathetic villain, the villain that you feel bad for, where it's like, oh, he's evil, he's doing all these evil things, but dang, don't I feel bad for him?
Mm-hmm. These are the villains that you're like, you know what? I wish the villain was doing better than the heroes, and you're kind of rooting, or you're more interested to see the villain on screen than you feel about the heroes.
Right. So a good example of this is, for anyone who's played Borderlands, the pre-sequel, that's where you see Jack. Jack is the villain in Borderlands 2. When you play the pre-sequel, you see him as just like, he's actually like a genuinely good guy, and he just slowly loses his mind, essentially. The Governor is also, from The Walking Dead, is another good example of a sympathetic villain, because you see this guy who's lost everything. I mean, obviously everyone's lost everything. But he's lost everything. His daughter's a zombie in a cupboard, and then she gets killed, and he just doesn't have anything anymore. He loses his eye, and then he goes, you know what? Revenge, we're going to kill everybody.
It's like you have an NPC who's lived long enough to become the villain.
Yes, it's a good
And
way.
maybe you could have him live long enough that he becomes a hero again.
Right. There are some, like Zuko is another example of a good sympathetic villain, because he was a villain in the first season or two.
And we hated his guts.
Oh yeah, he's one of those guys you love to hate, but you hate him, but then you find out more about his backstory, and you see some of his own personal struggles, and you go, wow.
And everybody with daddy issues loves that guy.
No, so one of the ways I think a really good way to show a sympathetic villain is to show glimpses of the villain's backstory. Maybe they run into an NPC that knew him personally, that can explain the situation to your characters. Like, yeah, I knew Johnson. He was a good guy. He saved my life a couple of times, but
or give him a goal that the players realize, hey, this is a really good goal, and I feel like this is a very fine line to walk, because if you give your villain a very good goal, the players might try to join with the villain.
right.
So you have to make sure that the villain stays a villain regardless of how noble their actions are.
No, it's possible that you could even have the characters, the players, actually do jobs for the villain. And it's like, okay, maybe he doesn't tell you the whole story. He's like, hey, I need you to do this, this, or this, and these three things. He tells you, he's like, yeah, we're going to do this because this church is corrupt. But it turns out that the church is just preaching against him. So when they go to the church, maybe they find some pamphlets or something that are talking about how this guy is doing evil things.
Mm-hmm.
And so you give them hints like that they're not so vague. Like I said, they find a pamphlet, or maybe when they're right before they kill the priest, he goes, "Why are you doing this?" And it's like, "Well, we're sent by this guy." And it's like, "I knew he had me, and I've been preaching against him since the beginning. He's been doing so many evil things. It's just one more evil act." And you don't have to be that obvious about it, but
you could set it up for the long term, where the very first act of them taking on this corrupt religion, it's just a small group of individuals in the religion who are corrupt, and then the villain is just taking it all the way and is trying to bring the whole system down.
Yeah, he's saying that the entire church is corrupt when it's really just this one small sect, and they're just in his way. And you figure these things out, and that's a good way of making sure that he stays a villain.
Mm-hmm. Another idea where you can make a villain feel sympathetic is somebody who's trying to take down the hierarchy, or a Robin Hood-like character who's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, but they have no empathy for those who are rich and those who are in power, and has absolute malice for anybody who is standing in his way to try to help others.
These kind of villains could be like corporations. You kind of like the head of the Merchants Guild or something. If you're playing in a fantasy setting, or if you're playing in a more modern setting, it could just be like XYZ Incorporated. XYZ Incorporated's leader, their CEO. These are the kind of villains that London's talking about. They feign this idea of, oh, we're going to help the poor, but the way that they go about things is super evil. It's not just, oh, we're going to... Because Robin Hood would rob people, but he didn't kill anyone. At least according to like the Disney versions of stuff. I haven't actually read like the actual legends of the guy, but you know, he in all the depictions we see of him, he doesn't kill anybody. But these kind of villains are great because they still show like a human side, something you can attach to, even if their methods are screwed up.
Another good villain that you can have to really surprise your players and make them remember your story, is having a twist villain.
And these are villains that weren't initially supposed to be the bad guys per se, but ended up being bad guys. You know, this is kind of on the same lines as a sympathetic villain, but rather than you feel bad for the villain, you're more annoyed and shocked that it's like, you were the villain.
Twist villains are very cliche, and that's due to Disney and Pixar, because when they first started doing twist villains, it was good.
Yeah.
But now every single Disney movie has a twist villain, and so it's overdone.
Yeah, it's kind of expected at this point. So, but to use the example, Lotso from Toy Story 3. Great example of a twist villain. Now, is he a good twist villain? That's another thing entirely. But he's a good example of a twist villain because he's a villain. Yeah, he starts off, he's like, oh, we'll take care of you guys. And he even goes so far as to come into the room and be like, what's going on? Why are all these toys being locked up? And says, well, we need to get them out of here. We're not going to do this. And then he turns on him in that moment. He's like, oh, we want to move. He's like, oh, you can't leave. You can't do this. Da, 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 da.
And then I think the reason why he was such a good twist villain was that you knew early on, and from the audience perspective, people are happy when what they predict happens.
Right.
So a good way to do this with your players is by throwing out a whole bunch of NPCs, and whatever your players like start thinking, suggesting, and like whatever creative juices that they are bringing to the table, and they're like, oh, you know what? I think Sarge is supposed to be the bad guy.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. So I was going to bring up the fact that Kevin and Sarge ended up being villains. Kevin was supposed to be a twist villain. He was supposed to be you're a bad guy. And Sarge wasn't initially that way, but that's what he ended up being himself.
But could you imagine if Kevin stayed the bad guy and Sarge stayed good?
Oh, it wouldn't have worked.
Or I mean, like Kevin and Randolph, because Randolph was the other one who was...
Yeah, Randolph was supposed to be a villain.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have worked.
Mm-hmm.
It honestly wouldn't have, but that's another topic for another video entirely.
But that is exactly why you need to make sure that when you have a twist villain, it's not out of the blue, like Hans from Frozen, who all of a sudden is like, oh, nobody really loves you, Anna. It's like, oh man, that felt cold, but it was also from left field.
Yeah, no one, because Hans didn't do anything to even hint that he was a villain.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta do something, like whispers, rumors that this guy is doing something. This guy's got some dealings under the table, and maybe he denies them. No, that's not the case.
Right.
And boom. Like I said, this could be very similar to the sympathetic villain, but it's just a little bit different because it's not meant to be. He's not meant to be the villain per se. He's not meant to be perceived that way.
Yeah.
But honestly, when it comes to being a DM and running games, London said you got to listen to what your players say and let them, like, oh, we think this guy's the villain. Make him the villain. Do something like that. Because you're not a god as a DM. You're not. You are telling a collaborative story together. That's what Dungeons & Dragons really is. What any of these tabletop role-playing games really are. It's a collaborative story. And if you don't let your players have some kind of insight into any of these, it doesn't matter what kind of villain you're using, what tactic you use. You could be the best storyteller in the world, but if your players don't feel like they're a part of it, they're not doing anything, they're not going to give a crap. Mm-hmm. A good example of this is Schmear. So I have you'll see Schmear come up in the next live play. But Schmear was a villain. I made him up on the spot. And everybody loved Schmear because he was super involved with every single character. He talked to them, he was funny, he was... I had some of Garrett does a thing where he asks if he can be like a Deadpool type character that knows what's going on. And I said, Garrett, if you can beat me in a dice roll, absolutely. And Garrett beat me in that dice roll. He was a villain that all my players cared about. And that's why they like him. It's because they felt like they had some part in his story.
Like he said, make sure that everybody's having fun. And as long as everybody's having fun, then they're always going to be initiated in your stories.
Alright, thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, we make a new video like this every Friday. So it's uploaded here on the Out of Initiative channel. We also do live plays on every 15th of the month.
Cool. And hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, smash that subscribe button.
Smash it!
Dude, smash it hard! Hit that bell icon so you get uploaded on all our videos, get reminders.
You'll get 100 V-Bucks! If you smash the like button in the next 3 seconds!